Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB bringing you InBetweenIsode number 182. This episode I'm going to do something a little bit different. The tea we're going to talk a little bit about is this cake, which was acquired on Taobao. This is the Xiaguan FT8653-5. I'll explain a little bit more about what that means, especially some of the specifics of that 8653 being the recipe. In just a second. This episode, I'm trying to take a little bit more advantage of the visual medium of just video. So going to show a little bit more visuals, going to do some screen capture, walking through just some of the concepts of buying factory tea. Alright guys, so as you can see, here is my screen. So right when I was starting with Taobao, I was looking to get a couple different factory recipes because one of the impressions I got with Taobao is that it was a very good place to buy factory tea, something which I definitely still do believe. And so usually the first thing when I start wanting to buy stuff on Taobao is to use Babbelcarp, which is a very helpful tool for getting the Chinese characters for different terms. So you kind of got to be familiar with some of the factory names and stuff like that. So Xiaguan, one of the big ones. So I will take these characters and copy paste it. And so it's easy because of Pu'erh, and especially with a lot of the old school factories recipe numbers, to just type in some numbers. So I could type in Xiaguan X8653. So this is a particularly famous one. So we're not sorting by year here, so you can see that you're getting some 2012 productions, some from 2005, all over the place. So usually it's a good idea to narrow your search. So to do that, go 058653. And so you can see that we are now looking at this. So originally when I was buying tea from Taobao, so there's a couple different variations. You could go like that, or you could go like this. So originally when I was buying tea from Taobao, this is what I was doing to find things. And I mean, it makes logical sense in a lot of ways. It's Xiaguan, it's 1 year, 2005, and it's a recipe 8653. And I figured that was a good place to start. And so if you guys remember, or if you guys look back in the archives, you can find that episode. And originally I said that I liked the tea for the price, and I had originally sort of tiered it as, you know, not a very particularly good tea, but a tea that is okay and that was drinkable. Since then, I've become a lot more lukewarm on the tea, and I've ended up tossing the tea just because I think it is not a very good tea at all. So one of the big perils of factory tea, and especially illustrated by this example of Xiaguan, is there are a lot of different productions. So there are different productions every year. What I found about Xiaguan is there are different productions under the same recipe name per year, and the quality and the price can differentiate quite a lot. And so when I originally searched for this, I settled for one of the cheaper options, understandably so. That's usually tends to be how I make my mistakes. And so I bought the cake. It was something like only 120, 130, maybe it was 150 RMB. So it was around $20 to $25. So very cheap. I bought it from this vendor, MXT. And so MXT is known to have, pretty legit. Like they're not known to have a ton of fakes or anything like that. And you can usually so I went through them, something which I do not regret necessarily. So for here, you can see that we could just do this search query really fast, toss in Xiaguan right there. And so you can see there's a lot of different options. So this option right here is probably what I would have gone for. So you could see it is 2005 production. And so you can scroll down, and we will use Google Translate here. So you can see that this is the August production for the same tea. So you might be like, okay, no big deal. That is quite a bit cheaper than all of these other supposed 8653s that are available on MXT. So that was basically my logic. But I found that, you know, some of these 8653s are actually far better than that cheaper version. So taking a look at this, so this is T8653, so we're probably looking at an iron cake, and so you could tell because it has these little dents on the side, and it doesn't have a bing hole like this one would, for instance. So a bing hole right there. And from there, you can even see that there are even more. So here's another one, 308 RMB, 328 RMB. So the cost is close, but they're still different productions, and they might be different. And then to add another thing of confusion in, you have these FT labels. So you guys might recognize this cake over here on the right as the one that I have. But what's the difference between this cake over here? And so we'll see what Google Translate says right here. About both of these teas. So you can see that this one is an FT. It is emblem. So the translation is almost exactly the same. So you really got to click into these cakes to really figure out what is the difference. So Feitai is a company that produced a bunch of teas through Xiaguan. They tend to be a little bit better, but similar to Xiaguan, it can really vary recipe to recipe, production to production. So you can see that this Xiaguan right here is a normal iron cake, or normal cake I should say. So this is the one I bought for 350 RMB. And this one over here is actually a FT iron cake. So that is the main difference from them. And the price, there is a significant enough price difference that you would think about the differences between these two teas. So 110 RMB, so a little bit under $20 is the difference from them. I have fussed around with this a lot. I've talked to a lot of different people about these different productions. I have composted one of my teas, so I am telling you guys this so you guys can avoid some of the mistakes I made earlier. My friend Toby also wrote out a number of the different Xiaguan productions, and some of these are on MXT, some of these are not. So you can see in 2005 we have the thick paper traditional fonts, 8653 iron. A lot of this is gibberish to us that don't speak Chinese, but if you do the actual Google Translate, you can see that some of these are thick paper or traditional fonts, some of these are simplified fonts. You could tell sort of from the paper that this would be a thin paper, and these might be, you can see it says thick in the Google Translate. So it's sort of a thicker paper, and so the paper itself doesn't really matter. It's the leaf that's inside, and so the thicker paper tends to be better. Earlier year for Xiaguan tends to be better, but you could see how this just quickly devolves into a mess of information and stuff that we didn't think we needed to know when we just wanted to buy simple factory tea. Alright guys, so you can see here that we are going to just take a look at the Bing. So you can see it is that same sort of tea that we saw on Taobao. So it was a little bit tricky on Taobao to tell whether it was an iron cake or not. So you can see that this tea does indeed have a Bing hole. You can see that it is nice and dark. You will be able to tell even more about the tea storage once we take a look at the wet leaves. You see that I've consumed quite a bit of this already. The wrapper itself didn't have any sort of easy way, at least, to see that this was a 8653 recipe. In fact, it actually says some different numbers over here. I don't know exactly what that means. But you can see here on the Neife that we are looking at a 8653-5 production. So that -5 will signify the year. So 8653-6 would mean 2006 production for this. It says Xiaguan Tuocha. This is not a Tuocha, but it is indeed a Xiaguan production. Again, this was done by the commission label. So nice and dark. The compression is still extremely dense. And so one thing I'm definitely going to be doing when I'm shopping for tea is I do not really want to even bother with the Kunming version of this tea. It would probably be considerably lighter than this, and it will be a lot less further along. These are teas that I think are compressed heavily, and they're not really intended to be aged. Well, at least historically, they're not intended to be aged places that are super dry, like Arizona or Nevada or something like that. So for me, as a Westerner living in a climate that is much drier than somewhere like Taiwan or Hong Kong, I'm going to try to get Bings that have been stored in places that have moved them along. So especially if the compression is really tight. I might care a little bit less about buying from a place like Guangdong or Hong Kong if it is I don't know, something like a special Iwu where you might actually prefer it to be dry stored. This is finally to the tasting portion of this tea. So this is again the Xiaguan FT8653-5, which is available still at MXT. So you might be going, okay, that was a lot of different teas. It's a lot of trouble. You have to go through an agent to get the tea, etc., etc. So why do you even bother? And the answer is mainly price. So you will see, you could find, for instance, that cheaper Xiaguan 2005 8653 that was selling for $20 to $25, and it would be very you could find that maybe on eBay for $60 to $70. So the tea is much, much cheaper, even after all those fees, if you know where you're getting it from and what the storage is. And it's a pretty open secret that a lot of those eBay vendors get most of their teas from Taobao, for instance. So this tea, 350 RMB. So I just did the math. That comes out to about $53, so about 15 cents a gram, for something that is now 11 years old and decent in my opinion. So here is steep number 3, steep number 4. Cheers, guys. So you can see from the liqueur that it looks nicely aged. We're getting an orangish red color, I would say. There's a light bitterness that courses through it. It's not overwhelming at all. I'm getting a lot of pine, a lot of resin, a little bit of sort of mouth-cool menthol going on. It's not ultra thick, but it is thick enough, I would say. Maybe a little bit of minerals as well. So here's steep number 4. I'm going to go ahead and do steep number 5 here as well. I find as you steep this out, sort of moves towards that classical Xiaguan profile. One thing that I do not notice in this tea, in most all occasions, is I don't have any smoke from it. So part of that can be attributed to maybe its production, maybe it was produced a little bit less smoky than other teas, and also just the aging that has happened. If you had stored this tea in Seattle for 11 years, I guarantee you that it would be much lighter, and the color that this would be brewing up would be some sort of yellow rather than this nice aged color that we're getting right here. Alright, so here is steep number 4. Cheers, guys. Bitterness is a little bit stronger. Could easily brew around that by doing it, steeping it for a little bit less time. I'm not steeping it too long. One challenge with a lot of these teas is that they are just very compressed, so you could very well easily end up with a lot of little bits in there, or the bits that you're getting are different, or if you're brewing up a Bing hole, then it's bound to be just extremely compressed. A lot of pine, a lot of resin too. I would say that the depth of flavor here, and just sort of like how far it goes back in my mouth, is good for a factory tea. I don't get a ton of, I don't have a ton of throatiness when I drink it, but it does get me towards the back of my mouth. Despite having some bitterness in the actual form, it mainly transforms into sweetness. So right now, if I were to think of what I was tasting in my mouth, I'd be tasting a lot of like sort of sweet pine, sweet fern, so sort of those woodier notes. And here's steep number 5, guys. Cheers. A little bit of creamy, a little bit of fruitiness. When I originally sampled this tea, it had a lot more fruitiness in it, and part of that could have just been how that individual sample was stored. But yeah, I can wholeheartedly say that this tea for $53 would probably be very satisfying for people that tend to like very robust, burly brews to their tea. It's not a great tea, or not even a extremely good tea, but it is, in my opinion, a decent tea for the price that is being asked. And let's take a quick look at the wet leaf. We are going to dump a little bit of this leaf out. I will probably continue to brew it because I do enjoy this tea. So you can see from the leaf that it is pretty chopped up. We do not have a whole lot of whole leaves in this production. That for me does not make it any less tasty. It is indeed a fairly tasty tea. We can also expect that this is certainly not a single origin tea or anything fancy schmancy like that. But we could see that the color, so usually as you brew out, and ideally this would have taken place maybe after the leaves have totally brewed out and stuff like that, but I think we're far enough along that you can sort of see. So the wet leaves will tell you sort of how the tea has been stored. The darker, that means that at some point it was more humid. So you can see that this tea has not been kunming stored or anything like that. The leaves would be a much paler, a much greener color. We're getting a sort of a steady brown. Maybe some of these teas look like they're a darker green, so sort of at that dark green, light brown. Another thing that we can tell is that these leaves are not cooked, as they are not totally black, as they would be if a tea was at least fully cooked. So I think that just about wraps up this InBetweenIsode. Let me know how you guys like this episode. If you enjoyed it, these episodes I think I would have to release a little bit slower than I would normal episodes, just because it's a little bit takes a little bit more time to edit these together and think of topics to cover. But thank you guys for tuning in, and cheers.